Okay, well, welcome to PTHEO 714 today, Science, Technology, Media and God. This week we're continuing our look at new media, and we're moving on from sort of a general discussion as to what that was and how that related to our sort of investigation of religion and technology before, through to actually thinking about the topic of online religion, or whether or not that's even a possibility, or how it might be manifest in different sorts of ways and things like that. So at the start, what I wanted to do was just throw a few ideas on the board here. When you hear the terms religion online or online religion, you know, what are some of the sorts of things that, you know, immediately spring to mind? You know, for some of you that may be nothing, but for others of you may have a whole lot of different experiences or things you've thought about. So what might some of those things be?
There's a distinction.
There's a distinction between
Online religion and religion online.
Okay, so online religion and religion online are perhaps different things. So, so that might be a question. Is there a difference between the terminology that's used in the literature that discusses that, or when people talk about it? But on a more mundane level, what are some of the things that, you know, might spring to mind? If someone says to you they had an experience of religion online, what might that look like, or online religion?
Well, it might be like in that virtual cathedral, the Anglican virtual cathedral, say, where they have an experience of a full liturgy over the internet.
Yeah.
It's something that I haven't actually experienced. It seems to work for quite a number of people.
Okay. Yeah, so that's one example, that in a interactive virtual environment like Second Life, people have set up what might be considered sacred spaces that people using the software and the internet connection can either go individually or meet with others and engage in some sort of spiritual ritual or practice or something like that. So let's just pop that one up on the board. What else might we have?
Oh, like online prayer networks.
So an online prayer network. So people would post in prayer requests, and then other people would read it, or they'd post it to someone who's a professional prayer.
Both, I would think.
Yeah.
Which is quite an interesting concept. It's like a blog in some ways.
Okay, so a prayer blog, so people can post prayer requests. In fact, there's one of those set up in the last couple of weeks in New Zealand using Twitter, so that people could text in prayer requests from wherever, and then they would go up on the Twitter feed, and whoever was following the Twitter feed could then sort of randomly pray those things as they turned up. So online prayer type of things.
Church websites.
Okay, church websites.
Of various levels, denominational, local.
Okay, so religious institutions, religious organisations, you know, they may be Christian churches, or they may be something like, I think there's Islam.net as well, or things like that, so that they have institutional websites that represent the bricks and mortar institutions somehow in cyberspace. And so that can be from the top sort of denomination type thing. So you obviously have, you know, the Vatican website, or you might have the Anglican Church in New Zealand's website, or you might have diocese might have a website, or a local religious community or church community might have a personal, smaller website as well. So that's the thing.
I like the one that says there's a Buddha net.
Yeah, so there may be differences between a set of websites that fall within a particular religious tradition, you know, so they fall within the broad Christian tradition, or they fall within the wider sort of Buddhist tradition, and then there are those who are articulating a particular institution or organisation within that as well. So what other things? One of the other things that was in the newspaper a couple of years back was mobile phones. having sermons or church notices and things just zapped to your phone every week or several times a day so that you could keep up with what was happening as well. So mobile communications might be another one.
Hearing sermon.
Sorry?
Hearing sermon.
Hearing sermons, yes. You know, yep.
The YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, something like YouTube allows people to record a sermon that might be preached or a message. It can then be downloaded at a later date or viewed at a later date. And certainly, in terms of sermons, say through podcasting, through being able to subscribe to an internet site or subscribe to an internet service that regularly delivers audio or video and audio messages to you, you know, for watching on your MP3 player or listening to on the train or something like that. Yeah, that's an extremely common way in which people might encounter religion online if they're encountering it in some form. Okay, well those are all good ideas, and we'll come across some of those as we go through the class today. But just to get yourselves thinking about the idea that religion online or online religion is both a mixture of people just sort of putting information out there and also people actually engaging in spiritual practices like prayer or something using the online environment. Somehow the online environment mediates a spiritual experience or a religious structure, as well as just having religious ideas out there in the online world. Okay, now I've got here a couple of images just for you to think about as we're coming on. The iGod one comes off a church website, you know, in the Auckland area. They have a website that you can go to and you can download sermons, you can download you know, text messages, other things that are happening. It's all sort of based around, you know, having an interactive web-facing front to their church community, branded in a way that is similar in its branding to the way in which technological products are branded and marketed.
I'm waiting for the silhouette to be female.
But the
silhouette on the screen. If I thought that was the God image on the screen, you see, I was getting very distracted.
Yes, yes, and that's an interesting point raised there, is that in this online religion and religion online, what are the images used to portray the religion that we find there? And a lot of the religious images, particularly if they're done in that sort of style, yeah, don't tend to be female images, but do tend to be a male image, yeah, as well. So that's something you could say, well, is online religion actually reinforcing particular gender roles or gender stereotypes? And that's a question to bear at the back of your mind. And the other picture here, you can see the woman meditating with the laptop in front of her. That comes from a project called the Wild Divine Project, which is software you can buy that comes with a biofeedback device you put on your hand, and depending on how you go through the different Eastern meditation rituals and things like that, it provides biofeedback that registers with the software, and so you can engage and do things in this interactive environment as you develop your own sort of spiritual and personal well-being through interacting with digital technology. So it's a real fusion of both Eastern mysticism with sort of Western sort of technological mentality as well, and fusing the two together in an interesting sort of way. I don't know if it's available in New Zealand or not, and if someone has it, I'd like to have a play sometime and see what it looks like. But certainly, you know, it's sort of the spiritual equivalent of a Nintendo Wii or something like that. But yeah. Anyway, so in today's lecture, first up, we've just got a few of those ideas out there. We're going to look back just to recap a little bit on where we've been and how we've got to this point. And then we're going to have a little bit of a look at looking at this idea of believing but not belonging in religious communities. Because it's one thing, we can talk about online religion and I can show you a zillion YouTube clips and websites and all the gee whiz features and stuff like that. But we'll try and frame it within a context of the changing religious landscape, particularly within New Zealand, but you know, across the world, and how different communities are using the online sort of world to address that and engage with that, as they're also facing, you know, how their physical communities are changing in structure and age and people's commitment to them as well. And then we look at that difference that was raised between online religion and religion online. And then some of the tensions and questions that arise out of this, who is being excluded, who is being embraced? Are there particular, say within the Christian tradition, are there particular theological distinctives that are being marginalised or wrestled with? So in the Christian tradition in particular, the idea of incarnation is, central to the faith in its broad sort of history. The idea that God would become flesh and blood, move into the neighbourhood, and the true revelation of God comes through the physical flesh and blood person of Jesus Christ and Christ's birth, death, resurrection and coming again. And so how in an online world where we almost have a sense of excarnation, of leaving the body behind to enter some other sort of world, are there irreconcilable tensions with something like the Christian tradition wrestling with that sort of thing? Okay, so going back to our the last few weeks we came through, we started off thinking that technology is not just things, but it's also ideas, it's also the socio-political systems and things that we find ourselves in, and technology is very much our environment. It's the sense of being almost wrapped in media, that sense that technology is so much around us that it's like the air that we breathe, and it's very hard to think critically about it. So that was one of those ideas that we teased out a little bit, and then we talked about those three sort of key responses to technology in general, but also particularly within religious communities. So technology is firstly an oppressor, that for all the good things it always brings more harm than good, and that somehow it shapes our lives in negative ways and directs us into ways in which will ultimately not be life-giving. So that's the negative, the pessimistic sort of approach. And on the other hand, there was the optimistic approach that particularly within religious sort of ideas, that technology and human reason and rationality were somehow possessed by human beings to change the world to be a better place. And so technology is a way in which God's grace perhaps is manifested in the world through human agency. And so we can cure disease, we can establish, houses that are leak-proof, we can wear clothes to keep us warm, and we can communicate with people around the world, and that's a wonderful thing, and it shows God's divine grace in the world somehow. And then there's the middle category perhaps where technology is an instrument, and it matters not so much what it is but how it's used. And we talked about how actually though that there's sort of an ambiguity in that in order for a particular technology or technologies to be developed, certain values in the community that produce them have to be manifest. And so it's not necessarily neutral, while there is sort of that ethical debate on how to use it as well. The fact that certain technology exists might already show that there are certain ethical values present in the community as well. And then that whole idea that technology perhaps, at least within the Christian tradition, has adopted, coming out of that sort of optimistic thing, narratives of purpose and of novelty. That human beings are sometimes described as co-agents or co-creators with God, there to somehow reshape the world and in sort of accordance with divine purposes if they can be divined, and also somehow to inject something new and novel into the world as well. And those two narratives can be found stretching through the technological community. Purpose to overcome a problem, novelty because let's do something cool and new and we'll find out something maybe at the end of doing that as well. And then that led us on to thinking about the idea of the cyborg, that humans, beings in human society, the boundaries between what is, say, inorganic and organic is blurring, or between machine and human, or the fact that we have become colonised by a technology and our identity might be defined by the technology that we use as well, and our perception of who we are stretches out to, to the end of our pen or to the end of our cell phone, or it's very much a cultural sort of idea of doing that.
Came through in Fisher's article that technology is just an extension of you.
Yeah, certainly it is, that you're not limited by the physicality of the body, that you can transcend yourself and extend yourself, not just through physical augmentation like a pacemaker or glasses or something, but that, something like an email connection or a cell phone or something like that extends you to the location that email or communication is going to. and it changes. And if you go out without your phone, you feel somehow naked, perhaps, that, you know, you've left your cell phone behind. Oh, you know, I'm feeling a little bit less than perhaps I was. So there's a dependency on technology as well. And then that last comment on new media and the shifting of authority. So we started to think about how in the Reformation times, in the Protestant Reformation, the idea that the individual and God could engage in a relationship without a priest having to be a mediator, the priesthood of all believers sort of idea, might be similar in some ways to how people are describing how we engage with information and media, no longer needing a media producer in the middle to mediate information to us, but rather we can produce YouTube videos or blogs or websites and create content directly and cut out the middleman in a sense, and that changes the dynamics of, you know, how society is structured in some ways.
In some ways we should be doing this course of virtual reality before you become a hologram.
Well, yes, a holographic class, that would be an interesting type of thing. And then we came up with those tensions too, where, and this is coming out of the sort of the anthropological work, the ethnography that's being done on things like YouTube, that on one hand we want to express our individualism, we want to express our independence, and yet at the same time we value community, we value relationships, we value authenticity, which in an environment that's mediated by technology, an environment like YouTube, or what actually is authentic human behaviour and identity in that environment. You know, so is someone being genuinely communicating who they are in an online environment without you being able to register things like body language, without you being able to register things like the tone of voice perhaps, and even with things like videos, you know, is that really what they mean or what they say, or are they just pretending that and just, you know, as a persona that's portrayed to the public as well? And so this idea that perhaps connection might equal some sort of constraint. If I form these in-depth and authentic relationships, somehow that's going to constrain me in my behaviour and things like that. Or perhaps they free you up for connection without constraint, which led into that idea of believing without belonging. So you might remain connected to a religious authority, a religious institution, and you might continue to believe them, the particular values and the ideas within that religious community, but you don't necessarily actually attend anymore. You don't actually encounter the same flesh and blood people week to week to week because you haven't actually committed to going to a physical location perhaps, or you shop around. You know, this is the church, this is the religious community that I'm involved with at the moment because it suits me, but tonight I'm going somewhere else to get something else for me. Or, you know, it's like supermarket shopping or that sort of thing, or pick and mix spirituality, consumer spirituality. So you have this idea perhaps of believing but not belonging, and so that raises questions about, you know, at least within religious communities, to do with spiritual disciplines and the way in which people work together through the hard times as well as the easy times as well. And so then that asks, you know, leads into questions about, you know, how does these sorts of questions, these sorts of things, how do they actually impinge upon religious belief? You know, people are obviously believing a lot of the same stuff, but not necessarily committing to traditional communities, or perhaps committing to new communities, and how does that manifest its way out in the online world? Now, on the question of believing without belonging, Kevin Ward, a New Zealand theologian, did some work on this in the past few years, and he looked particularly at things like church membership in New Zealand. So this will be sort of our background to where we're going, and this idea that you know, sort of two camps about why people were no longer either joining churches, or the church was in decline and numerically in some way, at least in institutional Christian churches. And you know, the argument came down sort of into two sort of camps. One is that you know, as the process of modernisation continued through the 20th century, people found less and less reasons actually to believe in the things religious. And so under the pressure of secularisation, the church was no longer relevant and they drifted away. And the other camp that said, well, actually, people still kept believing these ideas, but they just chose to stop belonging to those institutions. And he cites the example that he found in his, not just in religious institutions, but other institutions like athletics clubs. He said, you know, there were fewer and fewer people, particularly older people, joining the running clubs, the jogging clubs and things like that. But it wasn't that people had stopped running and stopped enjoying it, because he still saw the same number of people actually running around Hagley Park or wherever it was that he was watching. And that when they had round the bays runs and when they had other sorts of things, suddenly thousands of people who really enjoyed running and did running turned up, but they no longer belonged to clubs, which traditionally they would have done to do it. So they believed without belonging. And he said, so that's it's an interesting thing happening with volunteer organisations and things like that, sports clubs and things across New Zealand as well as churches. This idea that the values are continued to be held, but the lifestyle and changes in society perhaps argue against committing long term to particular institutions.
Be interested to know how much the advent of Sunday shopping and Saturday, especially Sunday shopping, had an impact on that. Whether church numbers drastically changed once they brought in Sunday shopping.
Yeah, well, certainly the 7-day, 24 hours a day, always active doing things might be part of it. You know, there's very little time to actually do it, and you start to see that, and that's one of the things we look at. But you start to see that communities and religious communities in particular start to change. So they'll hold a church service at 4:30 on Sunday afternoon or on Wednesday evenings or something like that to cater for people who are involved in the retail industry and, you know, have their weekends now totally taken up by servicing that particular industry. So that's an attempt to change how things are done in order to respond to a circumstance. But it may also be that there is just a societal lack of commitment or wanting to commit long term to something that is actually a cultural trend as well. Okay, and it may also be too that, because one of the other camps too is that while people keep believing but perhaps not belonging, the ways in which they express those beliefs have changed. So they may value certain things but no longer go to a Sunday church service, but they may meet with their friends in their house one night a week who hold similar values, share a meal, and effectively that functions like church. So the rituals changed, the liturgy, the ritual, the actual connection. They're still committed to something, but it's still there, buried away at the background. And so, you know, that filters through into, you know, the various statistics and things like that. So the International Social Science Survey, which has just been completed, which surveyed religion in 2008 around the world, and in New Zealand, you know, it said, you know, 50% of people believe in God, okay, and 20% believe in a higher power of some sort, but not necessarily a personal God. So that's 70% of people who still have some sort of religious sort of thing happening at the back of, you know, their thoughts perhaps from time to time and things like that. And then 30% are agnostic or atheistic. But when you actually see that in terms of commitment to attending a regular religious, say, service or something like that, that's dropped down to, you know, between 10 and 20%, depending on which survey you go to, which and regular might mean once a month, not twice a week. So, and people generally tend to overstate in a poll quite often, you know, how good they are at doing something. So, yeah, so around 15%, and then another 30% of the population might go once or twice a year. Might go to a wedding at a church. They might go to a Christmas service with family, or something like that. So there does seem to be some sort of basis for this idea of believing without belonging, that perhaps then opens the door to that believing being transferred into the online world and to the things that are available there to allow spiritual growth, if you want to call it that, to be accessed and developed. as well, in ways in which aren't time-consuming and don't require a commitment of a morning a week or something like that, but can be a continual process as well. The Presbyterian Church did a survey back in 2003 through AC Nielsen on what were people's perceptions of churches, institutional bricks and mortar churches, and very much the language shifted from religion to spirituality, which is an interesting twist, because a lot of religious people would consider themselves spiritual, but perhaps those outside of the religious community might not consider religious people as spiritual, and whatever that means. And so you start to see things like spirituality is important, but there's something more to life than just existing, or you don't need to go to church to express your spirituality. It's sort of an inward thing. I'll go for a walk in a forest perhaps, or I'll hang out with my family, or I'll play sport and celebrate my body, or the spirituality of the gym perhaps. There's a negative perception of that the church actually offers anything spiritual as well. And the way in which the church functions in its day-to-day commitment to things, the rhythm of life in a particular congregation or something, may be not at all the way in which the actual rhythms of life function for other people. And so rather than traditionally in Christendom the rhythms of the church year, the rhythms of the church week, sort of dictating how the community might function and orient itself around, now you have two completely different sets of rhythms that don't always synchronize themselves. And then you try also the idea that the language of journeying comes through. So, and this is something that Robert Withnow brings out looking at American religion since the 1950s, that you've gone from a spirituality of a dwelling or a place to a spirituality of seeking or of journey. And it's a change in the way in which people think, I'm on a journey, the journey is the reward perhaps. I'm continue looking for something, I still haven't found what I'm looking for, type of spirituality as well. So it's and that journey process allows you to construct your own sort of sense of spirituality and religion rather than being told what it is. It allows you to participate in things, so it's participatory. It allows people to be personally responsible perhaps for their salvation, and it doesn't necessarily dictate that you belong to a particular community. And so then you come to talking about online spirituality or spirituality online or religion online, then you really sort of need to try and thrash out a little bit what this idea of spirituality is. And so that's the sort of the question for the next couple of minutes is what are, just sit there and just have a think about what are some of the different ways you might define that.
I thought Heidi Campbell summed it up really, really well.
Okay, so Heidi Campbell, in one of the readings, had a definition of spirituality, and
yeah, she did. She said, spirituality is a concept, it's on page 54, is a concept found in many religions, religious traditions and worldviews. It can be synonymous with consciousness and implies that humanity exists as a union of a body and a spirit. The spirit is seen distinct from the physical matter. Spirituality differs from theology, which is an elaboration of religious doctrines and concepts. Spirituality or the spiritual refers to the human search for meaning, significance, recognizing the existence and development of the spiritual dimension in an individual's life.
Okay, so in that particular case, she's bringing out that spirituality is connected with an individual, and it's perhaps to do with a quest for meaning and purpose. Okay, so what are some of the other things though that people think about? I mean, one of the things that came up there was that religion, if she's equating that with theology, is a set of ideas, and spirituality perhaps is a lived experience. That's a fairly common sort of academic way of saying it.
It seems to me to be quite a dualistic sort of understanding of spirituality. there's the mind matter side of it, which isn't really, say, an orthodox Christian understanding of spirituality, which involves the whole person. The matter and the spirit can't really be divided out so neatly as some of the dualisms that suggest.
Yeah, certainly. Some spiritualities are very dualistic. They very much, see it as the tending of the inner component as opposed to the outer component, or the integration of both of them, but they're still two separate sorts of things as well. It's certainly there's almost, in some sort of ways in which people define spirituality, it's that integration of ideas or beliefs, values, and sort of praxis that it embraces not only the things we think about, but also how we live and the values and where those come from. And certainly one of the ways in which it's been characterised recently is the shift from spirituality starts within you, and so perhaps going back to that dualistic idea of some sort of metaphysical component of being human. That's the starting point, that you come out of that, and religion perhaps is a system that's imposed upon you, a set of ideas or values that come from an external source, whether that's a church, or whether that's a religious institution, or whether that's God, but somehow, or the Bible or something, but they're imposed on top of the individual human being. But I
guess I'd say spirituality is about being, meaning.
Yeah, so certainly, yes, it's not just about, sort of saying, who you are, but it's sort of who you can be, how you engage with the world, and summarising all the experiences behind you. And that's some of the things we'll bring out when we look at online religion, is how this quest for meaning, how perhaps these shaping of ideas and values and practices actually then get transposed into the online world in different ways, from religion online, which might be perhaps the way in which institutions and traditions try and project themselves forward, to online religion, which might be, again, starting with that individual quest for meaning and starting with, well, what works, what practices work for me, and actually exploring that. But anyway, that's probably a good place to stop, and then when we come back after the break, we'll pick up some of that, and we'll actually explore some of that in a bit more detail. Excellent. Thank you very much.